The richest man in the city had everything, until his daughter vanished and a poor, overlooked boy whispered 7 words that led him straight into a buried truth and a forgotten prayer. The words didn't echo. They struck, like a cold wind slicing through the heart of billionaire Donald Mulvey. Those 7 words stole the air from his lungs. He stood frozen in the middle of St. Ravel Academy's marble foyer, surrounded by security teams and desperate staff. But everything faded except the boy. Joshua looked up at him with wide, trembling eyes. His hands were calloused from work no child should have to do, and his voice, it shook, but it was sure. "Sir, she's down there." Hours earlier, Miley Mulvey had vanished inside one of the most secure private schools in the country. Security cameras blanked out, hallways searched, classrooms combed. Nothing, not a footprint, not a cry, only a pink backpack left near the east stairwell, as if she simply stopped existing. Police offered theories. Staff exchanged whispers, but no one saw what the janitor's nephew saw. No one noticed the girl with the toy rabbit slipping behind the door marked restricted, "Do not enter." No one, except the boy no one ever noticed. Before we dive deep into the story, do well to like, subscribe, share, and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Now let's dive back into the story. Earlier that day, sunlight poured into the grand halls of St. Ravel, like heaven trying to reach through stained glass. Joshua trailed behind his uncle with a mop bucket, invisible as usual. Wealthy kids laughed in packs, the sound bouncing off lockers like a hymn of privilege. When a crumpled note hit his back, he didn't turn. He'd learned not to. But then came something different, kindness. Miley. Her laughter was bright, but her eyes saw more than most. When her lunch bag slipped from her hand, she bent to pick it up herself. She smiled at Joshua, not the kind of smile that said, "I pity you." The kind that said, "I see you." Later that afternoon, a sandwich wrapped in napkins showed up by the gate, where Joshua always waited for his uncle. He didn't need a note. He knew it was from her. And that's why he watched when the sun began to set. That's why he followed from a distance when he saw her sneak past the safety signs toward the old basement. She was holding the rabbit like it was leading her somewhere. Then came the flickering light and the silence that swallowed her whole. Donald's legs finally moved. He dropped to his knees, not to plead with the boy, but to pray. "Lord, please, please let my baby be alive." Because sometimes, when the world's answers fail, a whisper from the invisible can carry the weight of God. The morning sun rose like any other, spilling through the wide glass windows of St. Ravel Academy. But something in the air felt off. It wasn't just the morning chill, it was the silence. The halls, normally bursting with chatter and the hum of teenage life, held a stillness that settled in people's bones. Miley's desk sat untouched. First period came and went. The teacher glanced at the empty seat and scribbled late beside her name. By second period, it was changed to absent. No one could reach her. A nervous kind of energy buzzed through the student body, like static. Whispers fluttered between locker doors and classroom corners. Maybe she's sick. Maybe she just skipped. No way. Her dad would never let that happen. Then came the black cars. A motorcade pulled up like something out of a political drama. Sleek, silent, and urgent. Out stepped Donald Mulvey, flanked by bodyguards and advisors in sharp suits. His presence swallowed the front office like a tidal wave. "Where's my daughter?" he said, his voice calm but carved from granite. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. The room fell silent as the principal stammered something about checking security footage, speaking to staff, retracing schedules. Within the hour, teams were pulling tapes. Admins were reviewing timelines. And over, the same chilling glitch. Between 5:47 p.m. and 6:03 p.m., every single camera blinked into static. Every one. Joshua stood near the trophy case, pushing a mop bucket quietly along the hallway tiles. He kept his head down, but his ears caught everything. "You're telling me the cameras all failed?" Mr. Mulvey's voice cracked for the first time. It was quick but real. Joshua gripped the mop tighter. He remembered her laugh, her smile, the sandwich. He remembered the flickering light behind the basement door, the toy rabbit in her hand. How she didn't come back. His heart thundered beneath his faded hoodie. "No one's going to believe you," he thought. "You're the janitor's nephew. You don't belong here." And yet, something deeper stirred in him. Not fear, but responsibility. Conviction. That evening, the gates were swarmed with reporters, camera flashes popping like fireworks. Police tape stretched across the main campus entrance, and rumors turned to fear. Joshua stood behind the shed, the place he always waited for his uncle. But this time his hands were clenched, not idle. "She helped me," he whispered. "Now I have to help her." He looked up at the sky, streaked in orange and fading light, and muttered a shaky prayer. "God, if you see me, if you care, tell me what to do." And for the first time in his life, he felt like heaven was listening. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. The basement door. Ready for the next? Drop it when you're ready, and I'll keep building with this same emotional and spiritual weight. The courtyard was chaos. Police radios buzzed. News vans lined the street like vultures waiting for a body. Parents hovered near gates, clinging to their children's hands as if they might disappear too. Somewhere, a teacher cried quietly behind a locked door. And then, a voice cut through it all. "I know where she is." People turned. Joshua stood barefoot on the edge of the crowd, his threadbare hoodie stained with mop water and sweat. His chest heaved, eyes wide, but he didn't run. Not this time. Not with a life at stake. A security guard started toward him. "Kid, back off." "She's in the basement," he shouted, louder now, voice breaking. "Your daughter is in school basement." Silence fell. All heads turned to the boy, but only one man moved. Donald Mulvey froze mid-stride. The air around him thickened. His face, once stone-cold and composed, cracked in an instant, just enough to reveal the tremble in his jaw. He turned slowly. "What did you just say?" Joshua swallowed hard. "Last night, I saw her. She went down behind the door in the east wing. The one with the warning sign. She had a rabbit. A toy. She just disappeared." The principal stepped forward, flustered. "That's impossible. That area has been sealed for a decade. It's condemned. No one goes down there." Joshua didn't blink. She did. The principal shook his head. "We know if that door was opened. It's locked. It's always been." "Check it," Joshua interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper now. "Please." People began murmuring, some skeptically, some with quiet hope. Donald stared at the boy. Everything about him screamed insignificant. Dirty knees, wild curls, fingernails caked with grime. But his eyes, there was no fear in those eyes anymore. Only truth. And something else. Something Donald hadn't seen in years. Faith. He remembered the last time he prayed. It was before the money, before the fame, before the power convinced him he could protect his family better than God could. And now here he was, powerless. And a poor boy's voice might be the only thread left to his daughter. Donald took a slow breath, looked down at Joshua, and asked quietly, "You sure?" Joshua nodded once. "She was kind to me. I remember that. So yeah, I'm sure." Donald turned to the guards. "Open the east wing. Now." "But sir," I said now. And just like that, The gates of pride cracked open. The richest man in the city just put his hope in the poorest boy in the building. The East Wing hallway stretched before them like a forgotten memory, long, quiet, heavy with dust and disuse. Joshua led the way, his small hands clenched at his sides, his chin raised with a courage far too big for his frame. Donald followed, flanked by 2 detectives and a school officer, tension rippling off of him with every step. For once, the billionaire wasn't in charge. He was a father, and a desperate one. They reached the end of the hallway, where the iron gate loomed like the mouth of some ancient cave. Time had not been kind to it. Rust streaked down its bars. The sign was barely legible. Unsafe. Restricted. Do not enter. A thick padlock clung to the latch. I still have the key, the janitor said hesitantly, stepping forward from the shadows. Didn't think anyone would ever need it again. Donald didn't speak. He just stared at the lock, as if he could will it open with a look. His heart pounded loud enough to feel in his throat. The janitor's hands trembled as he pulled out the keyring, worn with age. Metal clicked against metal. Then click. The lock dropped with a metallic thud. A blast of cold air rushed out like a gasp from the earth itself. It carried the scent of mold, paint, and something older, something forgotten. The flashlight beams pierced the darkness. A narrow stairwell descended into shadow. The concrete walls were cracked. Paint peeled like skin. The dust floated in the air, disturbed after years of silence, like ghosts waking up. Joshua stepped closer to the edge and pointed. There. Look. Footprints. Small. Sneaker-shaped. Leading down. Donald's stomach turned. His mind reeled with every possible scenario. Injury, kidnapping, worse. But those were her footprints. She made them. That meant she had walked. She was alive. Or had been. Miley, Donald called out, voice strong at first. Miley. Only silence answered. Then a faint tap. It came from somewhere below. Irregular, soft, but real. Tap. Tap tap. One of the detectives leaned over the railing. That could be water. Or, no, Joshua said. It's her. She's trying to be heard. Donald didn't hesitate. He gripped the railing and started down, the flashlight shaking in his hand. Each step deeper felt like falling into a different world, colder, darker, older. The walls narrowed. The air grew thick, smelling of mildew and scorched paint. And then, there it was again. Tap, tap. Donald's voice cracked this time. Miley. The silence swallowed his cry, then broke with something new. A sound. Not just tapping now. A voice. Faint. Fragile. But unmistakable. Daddy. The stairwell narrowed until Donald had to duck beneath a rusted pipe. Every step echoed behind him like hollow thunder. The tapping had stopped, but his heart now beat louder than any sound. Almost there, a detective muttered, sweeping his flashlight low. Joshua stayed close behind, eyes fixed ahead, lips silently moving in prayer. Please, God, please let her be okay. And then they reached the bottom. The concrete floor was cracked, damp, and covered in patches of moss. In the far corner, near an ancient boiler streaked with rust, a small shape curled into itself. Miley. Donald's voice was barely a whisper, but filled the room. He rushed forward and dropped to his knees beside her. Her pink ribbon, the one her mother tied every morning before kindergarten, was wrapped around her wrist, stained with grime, but still holding its color. Her skin was pale. Her clothes clung to her like wet paper, and in her tiny arms, clutched tightly to her chest, was a dusty leather notebook. Miley, he said again, cradling her against him. It's Daddy. I've got you, baby. I'm here now. She stirred weakly, her eyes fluttering open. She looked up at him, dazed, and whispered, Mommy wanted me to find it. Donald's breath caught. What? She didn't repeat it. Just looked down at the notebook before slipping into unconsciousness. The medics burst into the room seconds later, followed by officers and school staff. Orders were shouted. Blankets were wrapped. Oxygen masks lowered. But Donald didn't let go of the notebook. The leather was cracked, the edges worn. Inside were hand-drawn floor plans, old sketches of St. Ravel before the renovations. They were signed in delicate, unmistakable handwriting. Mara Ellis Mulvey, his wife, dead 10 years. His fingers trembled as he flipped through the pages. Notes, drawings, observations about the school's foundation, scribbled prayers in the margins, and then on the last page, written in faded blue ink, children beneath the hall. They must be remembered. They must be found. Donald's hand shook. This wasn't just an accident. Miley hadn't wandered. She had been led. He looked up at the shadows around him. The cracked walls, the quiet corners. How much had been buried down here? Above them, a stretcher creaked as medics carried Miley up the stairs. She was alive. Praise God, she was alive. But in her hands had been more than survival. It was a key. And somewhere deep inside Donald, past the fear, past the years of silence between him and God, something broke loose. A whisper. A memory. A second chance. The city slept, but Donald Mulvey didn't. He sat in the dark, alone in his study, the only light coming from a single desk lamp that spilled gold across the notebook still clutched in his hands. Outside, the wind tapped gently at the window panes. Inside, time felt frozen, as if God himself had paused the world to let this moment breathe. He flipped through the pages again, slower this time. His fingers traced Mara's handwriting, delicate, intelligent, almost prophetic. Each page whispered secrets she had carried, hidden beneath her smile, buried beneath years of silence. Ravel Orphanage. He stopped there. 3 words, underlined twice, followed by a name he didn't recognize and a date that predated the school. Curious, he leaned back and opened his laptop. Hours passed in a blur, archived newspapers, city blueprints, digital records. Piece by piece, the truth began to emerge like a bruise forming beneath the surface. Before St. Ravel Academy, there was Ravel Orphanage. It had stood on the same grounds, a place for abandoned children, funded by quiet donors and run by an elusive board. But in 1989, the building caught fire in the middle of the night. Dozens of children trapped. Most didn't survive, and yet some did. Among them, Mara Ellis, his wife. Donald stared at the screen, unable to move. She never told him. Not once. Why? He closed the laptop and buried his face in his hands. The kind of ache that came next wasn't just grief. It was guilt. How much had he missed? What else had she carried alone? Across town, Joshua lay awake on a thin mattress near the laundry room. His uncle paced in the kitchen, muttering softly to himself before finally speaking. "You know, Mama used to tell stories," he said, "about a fire, about children left behind." Joshua sat up. "At a school?" "No, before the school. Said it was a home for orphans. Said she lost someone in that fire, a little brother. Never talked much about it. Just lit a candle every year." The air felt heavy all of a sudden, like the past had finally caught up to the present. What if we're part of this? Joshua asked, his voice small. His uncle looked at him, eyes wide. "What do you mean?" Joshua held up the ribbon he'd kept, the one that once hung from Miley's wrist. What if God's trying to remind people what they forgot? Silence settled. Then his uncle whispered, "Sometimes God doesn't speak loud, son. Sometimes he whispers through what survives." In a city built on progress, the past had found a voice. Through ashes, through whispers, through the hands of a girl who should have died, and a boy no one saw coming. And now, the puzzle was sharper than ever. The orphanage, the fire, the children beneath the hall, and a woman who tried to tell the truth before she died. The apartment was small, just 3 rooms and a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people to pass without brushing shoulders. Paint peeled at the corners, and the scent of old cooking oil lingered in the air. But there was warmth here, the kind money couldn't buy. Donald Mulvey had never stood in a place like this before. He didn't wear his tailored suit this time. Just jeans, a gray coat, and a face that had aged 10 years in 1 week. He gripped a notebook in one hand and a single white rose in the other. Joshua opened the door slowly. "Hi, sir." Donald tried to speak, but words caught somewhere in his throat. He looked down at the boy, the same boy who had saved his daughter's life, and all he could do was nod. Joshua's uncle stepped forward. "Come in." It wasn't a command. It wasn't even an invitation. It was mercy. Donald stepped inside, and for a moment, time felt strange. Quiet. Joshua sat on the couch, eyes lowered. Donald joined him, placing the rose on the table between them. "I came to say thank you," he said softly, "and I came to ask for forgiveness." The older man tilted his head. "For what?" Donald hesitated. "For not knowing, for forgetting, for thinking money could insulate me from what matters most." No one spoke for a moment. Then Joshua's uncle reached into a drawer and pulled out a worn photograph, the kind that fades to sepia over time. He placed it on the table beside the rose. "This is from the orphanage. My mama kept it all her life." Donald leaned in. A group of children stared back at him from the past, their faces frozen in mid-laughter, all barefoot on a cracked front step. His breath caught. There she was, Mara. Her hair was tied back in a ribbon, and she was smiling in a way he hadn't seen since the early years of their marriage. Beside her stood a smaller boy, maybe 6 or 7, with eyes that mirrored the man now sitting across from him. "My uncle," Joshua said quietly. "That's him." Donald looked between the photo and the man. "You knew her." "I was just a kid," the uncle replied. "I remember her kindness. How she used to sing to us. She used to say, 'We're not forgotten. God knows our names.'" Donald's eyes burned. 2 children. One rose to wealth. The other faded into the shadows. But they had started from the same fire. "I want to restore it," Donald said suddenly. "The basement, the records, everything. Not for me, not even for Miley, but for them. For the ones who were left behind." The uncle stared at him, guarded. "Because you feel guilty." Donald looked down at the photo again. "Because I feel human." That night, Donald signed a check so large it could have rebuilt a city block, and quietly submitted the first plans for the memorial wing for the forgotten children of Revel. But as he walked back to his car, he stopped in the middle of the street, looked up at the stars, and whispered, "Lord, if she was trying to tell me all this from the other side, I hear her now." And for the first time in a long, long time, he felt forgiven. The morning of the ceremony, the air was crisp and clean, like even the weather understood something sacred was about to happen. Balloons floated at the school gates. Reporters lined the sidewalks with cameras poised, ready to capture the moment. Parents filed into folding chairs. Teachers, dressed in their best, stood along the steps. The newly rebuilt East Wing gleamed in the sun, no longer a dark, condemned hallway, but warm, welcoming space with glass doors and soft lighting. Inside, the basement had been transformed. What was once decay and darkness now held shelves, books, photographs, and the names of children once forgotten. A plaque waited beneath a velvet cloth. But outside, on the makeshift stage in front of the school, Donald Mulvey stood, holding a microphone in hands that used to hold nothing but power. He looked different now. Lighter, older, human. Everyone expected a polished speech, filled with corporate words and generous donations. But that's not what they got. He cleared his throat. I was asked to say something today. Something about the renovation, the vision, the generosity. A few polite chuckles rippled through the crowd. But the truth is, he continued, I didn't save this place. I didn't find those blueprints. I didn't remember the children who were forgotten. He paused, swallowed hard. My daughter did. And a boy with no reason to risk anything risked everything. He turned slowly and gestured toward the crowd. Joshua, would you come up here? All eyes turned. At the back of the gathering, Joshua froze, wide-eyed. His uncle gave his shoulder a squeeze. Go on, son. Joshua shuffled forward, hands clenched, face flushed, sneakers scraping the pavement. He stepped onto the stage like he didn't belong there. But the truth was, he belonged more than anyone. Donald knelt beside him, took the mic again, and pointed gently. This young man, his voice broke for the first time, was shown kindness when he didn't expect it. My daughter gave him a sandwich, a moment, a smile, and he didn't forget it. The crowd went quiet, even the breeze stilled. And when she disappeared, when every adult failed, he remembered her. He saw what no one else saw, and he spoke up when it would have been easier to stay invisible. Tears streamed freely now down the janitor's cheeks. Students who once passed Joshua without a second glance now watched him with awe, with respect, with something holy. Donald smiled through his own tears. So today, I'm announcing a full scholarship in his name, the Joshua Ellis Courage Award, for any student who shows bravery born out of kindness. He turned to the side of the stage, and two students unveiled the cloth covering the bronze plaque near the library's new entrance. Sometimes the smallest voice saves the loudest life. There was silence, and then applause, but not the usual polite kind. This was thunderous, deep, real. Hearts were stirred, lives were changed. And as the sun crested the school's roofline, a soft breeze rustled the ribbon tied around Joshua's wrist, pink and faded, but still holding strong. Winter had softened into spring. The trees that once stood bare outside St. Revel now reached skyward, crowned with new leaves. Children's laughter echoed across the courtyard, bouncing off clean windows and freshly painted walls. Inside the memorial library, beneath where secrets once festered in shadow, two children sat at a reading table, books open, legs swinging freely. Miley Mulvey, healthy and full of light, wore a blue ribbon in her hair. Her laughter rang like wind chimes in the quiet room. Beside her, Joshua leaned in to read aloud, now in a crisp uniform with his name stitched proudly on the chest. No longer invisible. They weren't just classmates now. They were friends, bound by something stronger than school walls or family names. From the back of the room, Donald Mulvey watched them through the glass, not as a billionaire, not as a public figure, but as a father who had seen mercy firsthand. His heart was quieter these days. He walked slowly toward the plaque that hung beneath the skylight, where sunlight now poured down without shame. It was the same skylight that once reflected flashing cameras and media frenzy. But now, it felt like a window to heaven. He knelt before the plaque. Sometimes the smallest voice saves the loudest life. Donald reached out and touched the bronze gently, as if touching something sacred. Then he bowed his head. "Thank you, Lord, for second chances," he whispered. "Thank you for Joshua, and for my daughter's life, and for the voice I almost didn't hear." Tears welled, but they were different now. Not from fear, not even grief, but grace. He stayed there for a while, breathing in the silence, letting the past settle into peace. And somewhere between pages and prayers, the story found its rest. The basement, once sealed with fear and loss, now stood open, filled with names, laughter, books, light, and the quiet footsteps of healing. Somewhere in the hush of that sacred space, the narrator's voice returns. Power builds walls, but compassion breaks them. Sometimes what saves us isn't money nor fame, but the courage of a forgotten child who dares to speak.
If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video. Comment where you're watching from. Share it with someone who needs to remember that God still speaks through unexpected voices. And if you believe that kindness still has the power to change the world, type, "I hear the whisper" in the comments. Because sometimes all it takes is one small voice to shine a light beneath the ground.